Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at this latest offering from the Singaporean micro brand. This is the MMI and this is their latest prototype, the Turret Chronograph. Do note this one was loaned into the channel for review. Again, this is a prototype, so if you see any scratches, scuffs, etc., that can be attributed to that. Additionally, in case you missed it, this one was featured in an unboxing recently. If you want to check out the packaging, you can see the box, the watch roll, the warranty card, those kind of things. It does ship exactly as you see it here, so you're going to get the watch, and it does include this bracelet, which we'll talk about all of that in detail. This one, I note, is in the Turret series, in that you might have recently seen they did have a successful Kickstarter campaign of their first model in the Turret lineup, and that was just the Turret. This one does carry over some similarities. Most notably, it's going to have actually the same case, with the exception of the case back, which is about a half a millimeter thinner on this version. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about some of the specifics. First, for warranty, you do get a 1-year warranty with this model. As far as sizing, I mentioned in the unboxing, from pictures, this one looked a little larger than it actually is in reality. This is coming in right around 40 millimeters for the case. On my calipers, at the 3 to 9, and that's just inside of those crown guards there, I measured this at 39.8 millimeters, so pretty much spot on. The bezel is just about flush, and I measured that as being the same, 39.8 millimeters there as well. The lugs are kind of unique for a 40mm watch in that they are coming standard with 22mm lugs on this. So you'll notice it doesn't have a lot of taper to that like you'll oftentimes see on this case shape, but we'll talk about that further. The lug to lug is coming in at 46.7mm, so nice, versatile, small wrist friendliness there. And then again, this does have female end links as well, so that's going to stay true to that 46.7. The overall thickness. This one's coming in a little thicker than I initially had thought. This, with the crystal, is coming in at 14.4 millimeters, so just shy of 14.5. Not terribly thick, but definitely on the chunkier side. Without the crystal, their specs have it coming in at 12.3 millimeters. As speaking of the crystal, this one does come with a double dome sapphire crystal, and it does feature 10 coatings of inner AR. You can see there, give an idea, certainly like any other double dome crystal, it still can pick up reflection, but I found it to perform pretty well in general use. But we'll look at it outside as well. As for the movement, this is going to be coming standard with a Seiko VK67A, which is a mecha quartz movement. If you're not familiar with mecha quartz movements, it essentially is a quartz movement, but then it has a chronograph mechanical drive on that as well. So let's go ahead and start that, and you can see you get still the nice smooth sweep. So you get kind of the best of both worlds of having the simplicity and ease of a quartz while still having some of the smoothness that you would get with a mechanical watch. As for the water resistance, this is coming with 100 meters or 10 atmospheres of water resistance. For the weight, I mentioned in my review that this one felt a little bit heavy to me. I was actually surprised. You know, it's not coming in too bad on the bracelet, and this is sized to my 6.5-inch wrist, which I did remove, I believe, 6 links from this. It's coming in at 154 grams. Which really isn't too bad. That's right what I would call in the middleweight category. Certainly it's not one that's going to disappear, but it's not particularly chunky either. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into this actual watch, the characteristics, what it's like to live with, and then we'll conclude with the pros, cons in my overall summary. First, for the dial. This one is going to be available in 3 colors as far as the Kickstarter standard. And I did neglect to mention, this will be coming to Kickstarter on December 15th of 2020. There's going to be a total of 250 pieces produced. As for the colors, it's going to launch with a white, black, and gray dial option. Additionally, there will be the red one that you see here, and a yellow version that are going to be Kickstarter stretch goals. I do expect this one's going to do well, especially for the price point. I'll give you a spoiler there. This is coming in at under $300 for the super early bird pricing, which I think is very reasonable, but we'll talk about that further. Looking closer at the watch, you can see on the dial, the most striking characteristic is it does have that 3D effect with the center dial. It's almost like a sandwich type construction, but they mill out the exterior as well as for each of the sub dials. The dial texture is going to be what they refer to as an eggshell, but you could also call a satin finish. It does have sub-dials located at the 12, 9, and 6 o'clock positions. And those sub-dials at the 12 o'clock, that's going to be your chrono minutes. At the 9 o'clock, that's going to be your chrono hours. And then down at the 6 o'clock position, that's going to be your primary second hand. And as you can see, it does have a moving primary second hand. This does also have printed text on it. You're going to have printing at the 3 o'clock position. You're going to have the MMI symbol, as well as the name, and they, I believe, describe this as hybrid chronograph there as well. With that, as far as the overall balance, I do think that was a good call on putting that at the 3 o'clock position. I think it tends with this 3 sub-dial configuration, I think it tends to balance that out a little more. One of the coolest features of this is as you move out towards the perimeter, you'll notice that it does mill down in, and you can see numbers around there. What those are is that's actually your date complication. It has a rotating disc that moves around. So instead of having a static date window that has the date displayed and the wheel rotates underneath, this actually, the wheel moves around as you go for the date, which is a pretty cool effect, and that's something that carries over. Differently implemented, but it is a carryover from the turret, though the legibility has been improved on this second iteration. Then when you go to the furthest extreme of the perimeter here, you can see it has a very steep rehot, and that is color matched with the wheel as well. Nice touch, nice textural match there as well. I believe that's probably anodized, but it does match that satin kind of finish. Switching over to the hardware, you'll notice the handset is going to be what I would describe as a pencil or a sword type of handset there. It is going to be heavily polished, and it does have a facet line down the middle, kind of like a Dauphine crease. Looking at the rest of the hands, you can see that there is a color match for this that is going to be on your chronosecond as well as each of your 3 sub-dial hands. And in this case, they have a very vivid, very nice looking orange. As for the hardware, you'll notice that the hardware on this one is going to have for the markers all the way around. You can see that this does have pentagon shapes, though it's a really exaggerated, almost like an arrow or pencil style, mini pencil style for the hardware as well. Additionally, you might have noticed that this does not have the markers at the 12, 9, and 6 o'clock position, and that's consistent with the sub-dial configuration, not allowing for room there. Shifting over to the Loom, this one has C3X1, which is the top grade for C3 Loom applied, and that's going to be on your hands, and that is all of your hands, including your sub-dial hands, the markers, as well as the bezel, and even the date. As you can see here in this footage, I think it performs pretty well. It's not the strongest application I've ever seen, and as you might expect, on the sub-dials in particular, those do tend to be rather dim, and they fade fairly quickly compared to the rest of the markers in hardware, but overall, I think it's pretty well done. Shifting over to the bezel. The bezel on this one is going to be a dive-style bezel, and as you can see, it does have your minutes going all the way around there. It is 120 click, and it's unidirectional. Let's go ahead and listen to that action. Pretty nice tactile click for that overall. I will say the bezel is a little bit hard to grip. It's not real bad, but it definitely can be a little bit slippery. And of course, I'm getting fingerprints all over that there while we move that around. Overall, I think the action is pretty good. I wouldn't mind a little more traction for that, but it's not too bad. As far as the bezel inserts, these come with a stainless steel bezel insert. In the one that we're looking at today, this is going to be an ion plated, which I believe is going to be for most of them, with the exception of the gray variant, which I believe comes with a gray DLC coating. As we already talked about, there are loomed marks all the way around. You can see individual minute marks up to the 20-minute, and then the rest in 5-minute increments. The edge of this is going to be a traditional coin edge, very cleanly done there, but as I mentioned, it is rather thin, so it doesn't give you a lot of surface area to grip a hold of. So it isn't the easiest and best for grip without having an overhang and without having that thickness, but it's not too bad. Shifting over to the case. As I mentioned, the finishing on this should be pretty similar to the turret, if you're familiar with that model. This is going to have somewhat of a slab style on the side here, and you can see that it does have vertical brushing running along. Though at the top, it does have it nicely broken with polished chamfered edges there as well, which I think is a nice touch and I think makes it look more attractive. This does have, as you can see, downturned lugs, and I'm very pleased to say they do line up nicely with the case back, which is always something that I like. Looking at the lugs themselves, this is a really nice touch here. Instead of just carrying over with just the outer perimeter of being polished, you can see the inner actually has that polishing as well. So it's broken up down the middle with that linear brushing there, and I think that's a nice compliment. Shifting over to the crown side, you can see this does have a double pusher configuration. The top gets your chrono going, the bottom resets your chrono, and then it's smack dab in the middle, you do have a crown with 2 integrated crown guards sandwiched right around that. The crown itself is going to be 6.8 millimeters, so it's a decent sized crown there. I will say though, it can be a little bit tough the way these are incorporated there and the way it sits down in. It's a little bit tough to grip a hold of. That being said, this is a mecha quartz movement, so it's not like you're going to be adjusting this regularly like you would be with a automatic, so really nothing to complain about there. The crown, as one might expect, is going to be a screw down crown. And as you can see, it is signed, but not only is it signed, it actually does have Loom applied to that as well. And we'll go ahead and pop up a picture of that. Shifting over to the case back, the case back on this one is going to be a screw down case back. It is nice and cleanly milled, though I would say it's relatively shallow, which is kind of nice because it lends to smoothness. But you can see it is very cleanly applied as you go around, and it is going to be predominantly radial brushing, and then in the middle it does have a bead blast texture where it's milled out as well. Shifting over to the bracelet. The bracelet is going to be coming in, it's of course 20 millimeters, and it does taper, or 22 rather, millimeters, and it does taper down at the clasp to 20 millimeters. As you can see, it is an H-link construction, and it is a linear brushing that's applied across all surfaces there. The end links are going to be female end links, so you have, as we already talked about, nice articulation as you go through, despite the fact that this does have reasonably large links all the way through. But I find it drapes relatively decently with one caveat, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The links are going to be held on with screws instead of pins, so that makes for nice, easy changes. If you're looking for a screwdriver, do recommend a quality one. I have actually one linked down in the description for Amazon affiliate link. Helps out the channel if you use that to make any purchases. Additionally, the bracelet will come with a quick release mechanism, so you might have seen that on the back when we were looking at the case back. That is double end there for your spring bars, so that makes for nice, easy strap change friendliness, which I always am very glad to see that. As for the clasp, as we already saw, this is signed. It is going to be a fold-over configuration, and it does have double pushers to open that up. And when you open it up, you see a milled bridge inside as well. So overall, pretty nicely done. Then finally, on the side there, you can see it does have 5 micro adjust holes as well. All right, so now that we have a better feel for the watch itself, let's go ahead and look at a couple comps. First, I just wanted to give an idea as to what this coloration looks like. So here it is. This is next to a Zelos Hammerhead 3 in their Crimson dial. You can see the different presentation for this. Very different coloration between those, and of course a very different pattern and texture as well. And then for sizing, I wanted to pull this in. This is a Wise Hitman, and this is a 41 millimeter watch. Just to give you an idea of, you can see the case itself between the 41 and the 40 here, I think presents relatively similarly. But with having that sub-dial kind of configuration, or that milled out sandwich dial configuration, you can see the dial itself does present rather small comparatively. But that being said, because of the ring, because of everything going on, I don't think it has minimal wrist presence by any means. But just wanted to highlight that aspect there of the dial. All right, so now that we have a better feel for all of that, let's wrap this up with the positives, my personal critiques, as well as the overall summary. First, for the positives, we were just talking about that dial, and that's one of the things that I think is pretty cool about this watch. I like the 3D depth that gets. As you look around this, it gives a nice shadowing. It just really has a lot going on for it, and I think it's a cool look. As far as the pricing, already mentioned that this one's coming in at under $300. For that, I think you get a well-spec'd watch, and I think it's nicely executed, so I think that's a great buy. The date for this, again, this is something you don't see every day. It's something that goes different from a lot of other offerings out there. I think it's well done. As far as legibility, it takes a little of getting used to as far as where the date is actually at. You're not just looking at one position on the watch. That being said, nothing to complain about, and it's something I like overall for feature. The feeling of this. Part of what I mentioned as far as the weight, this one I expected to weigh more than it does, and part of that is because it feels so solid in the hand. Everything about it just feels very stout, very rugged, very well built. So I think this is definitely a very durable. It could be used as a beater with that quartz movement or mecha quartz movement. So I think that's a nice aspect as well. Comfort overall with the downturn lugs that match right with the case back, and overall the decent bracelet articulation, just the way it sits on the wrist. I found this one to be pretty comfortable, so that's of course a plus. And then finally, the size. As I mentioned, in pictures, I thought this was much larger than it was, and then just now we looked at it next to a 41 millimeter dial, and the dial looks smaller. I think this is kind of a chameleon. Whether you have a larger wrist and want this to appear a little larger, I think it will. If you have a smaller wrist and want it to appear smaller, like on my 6.5-inch wrist that we saw earlier, I think it adapts to that as well. So between the short lug to lug, the unique dowel configuration and layout, I think this is a pretty adaptable size. But that's not to say I think everything's perfect. So let's talk about some of the things that I personally think are critiques. First, this is a fairly minor item, but one that I would have definitely liked to see changed, and hopefully they will implement on the production model, and that is the markers here for your minute marks. As you go around, you can see it does have printed markings all the way around. I would like to see that cleaned up, and just to have that for improved legibility only be 5-minute increment or single minute increments there. So between your 5, so that way you could get precise legibility. Because as it is right now with all those ticks, you really are almost like you don't have markers there at all. You're not going to really index off of that to get precise time. On the bracelet, this is something that's just a minor item, but I did want to mention. You can see this bracelet or this screw is screwed all the way down in. And over here, you can see that does stick out a little bit. I'm sure that will be cleaned up on the production model. Again, this is just a prototype, but they just need to work on the length a little bit for that. Not all of them exhibited it, so I'm not sure if it was just variability in the screws or bracelet lengths or what that is, but you can see this one's flush, whereas this one protrudes just a little bit. So just a minor thing to clean up. I said that we talk about the clasp or the bracelet articulation, and specifically want to talk about the clasp. One thing that you'll notice here, this has a relatively large link where it joins with the clasp, and additionally it's fixed. So what ends up happening is effectively you extend the length of the clasp overall. So you've got the full bridge length, you've got the actual clasp itself, and then you have a fairly large length, clasp or end link on the clasp there. And as you can see, that takes away some of the articulation for that. I haven't found this to be bothersome. That being said, most watches tend to go with a smaller or an articulating link there. I think that would have been nice if they can make that adjustment, either shrink that down some or give that articulation, which I think would be the ideal. The bezel insert on this, I personally would have preferred if they had gone with a polished ceramic bezel insert instead of the stainless steel, but that being said, that might have added to the cost, and overall stainless steel with ionic plating or the DLC I think is just fine as well. And then finally, the date legibility. As I already mentioned there, the date legibility, it's not as legible as you would have if you had a fixed type of date complication. That being said, I think it's a very minor thing. It's something you quickly adapt to, and overall stylistically, I wouldn't want to give it up because I do think that's part of what makes this watch, but I did want to mention it. If you are very concerned with date legibility, this one is a little bit harder to read than a traditional complication would be. So finally, where does that leave us? For the summary, I think MMI has achieved not only an original design with this watch, but in my opinion, they've done so without really making any polarizing choices. I think overall it has pretty classic look and design to it, despite the fact that there are unique elements throughout. I think it wears well, I think it's size versatile, and at the price point, at under $300, I think this is a great option for an everyday, it's a simplistic watch because it's a mecha quartz. You can pick it up out of the box, slap it on wrist, you can use it as a beater, you can use it as an everyday watch, however you want to use it. I think this is a good option. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy this one, and you could please hit that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, it's tremendously appreciated and greatly helps me out if you can smash that subscribe button. Finally, as I mentioned, I will have Amazon affiliate links and a link to my Instagram in the description as well. And I appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for watching.